Hidden away behind the neat clipped grass of Colchester Garrison is a place that calls itself a military corrective training centre. But for many who enter its gates, it is every bit as brutal and isolating as any prison. The MCTC is an institution with a split personality. It punishes, but claims to rehabilitate. It disciplines, but calls itself supportive. It expects soldiers to become reformed warriors, yet still regards them as criminals in uniform. From the outside, it looks neat, even professional, but its highly regimented routines and military-style punishments cast a long, shadowy chill across the minds of those sent there.
In 2022, inspectors found a place still grappling with its identity. There were only 33 men on site at the time, in a centre built to hold up to 323. But even with that tiny number, the strict regime imposed a grinding monotony that leaves detainees with little control over their lives. The detainees are a mix of court-martialed soldiers, sailors, airmen, and even civilians subject to military law. Men who have been found guilty of desertion, violence, theft, or worse. A few are still hoping to salvage a military career, while others know they will leave these walls branded and shamed for life.
Life at MCTC is divided between two main accommodation blocks, with men sharing dormitories or smaller four-person rooms, and only a handful in single cells. D block, a high-security segregation unit, was mothballed, but its very existence, waiting like a dark relic, reminds everyone what happens if you truly break military code. Most new arrivals pass through A Company for induction, a harsh transition from barracks or a cell somewhere else to this strange halfway world between prison and regimental discipline. The Service Custody Platoon, a section within the site, serves as a holding pen for those awaiting trial or transfer to a civilian prison. There is no question, if you breach discipline too badly, you'll find yourself behind those heavier, locked doors. Daily life is a military routine set to the second. On their first day, new detainees are marched through a painfully short induction and given a regulation dorm bed, a locker, and the same uniform that reasserts their status as soldiers under punishment. There is no personal identity here. You are a surname, barked by staff, reduced to ranks and numbers. Even requests to speak with a lawyer or see family go through rigid chains of command. Some describe feeling humiliated by the reminder that they wear their former uniform as punishment. Yet, there are small mercies. Food, shockingly, was described as impressive by inspectors, with healthy options, generous portions, and religious diets respected. A far cry from the grey gruel of many prisons. There is also a padre on hand, offering spiritual counsel to men at their breaking point. His presence is so visible, he is described as being woven into daily life, which speaks to the mental and spiritual toll the place takes. The padre's job is no easy one. Men here struggle with loss, shame, anger, and fear about whether they will ever rebuild their careers or face the scorn of their families. Some detainees spend up to 15 hours unlocked each day if they progress to stage 3 of the behavioral management scheme, a system known as staging, which gives rewards to those who toe the line. Privileges like town visits, more phone time, or the ability to roam certain areas unescorted are a hard-won prize. Those who slip can find themselves rapidly demoted to stage 1, living under near total supervision, cut off from civilian clothes, losing precious contact with the outside world. Physical activity is seen as therapy, or perhaps as a form of relentless military punishment, depending who you ask. Detainees can go to the gym 14 times a week, hammering their bodies back into military shape, a process some see as penance. The library, with a tiny budget, tries to offer reading material, but literacy support is patchy. Courses in CV writing and interview skills aim to get those discharged into civilian life, but the reality is many of these men will return to a society that sees them as broken. behind the sterile routines lurk darker corners. MCTC has no adult safeguarding policy for vulnerable detainees. A serious safeguarding allegation was simply left uninvestigated, exposing a worrying blind spot in a place that claims to protect the vulnerable. Suicide prevention protocols are robust, but some measures border on cruel. Nightlights left on all night, constant hourly checks, communal razors confiscated even from men sharing with someone on a suicide watch list. These blanket measures are so severe they end up punishing everyone. The regime's sense of order is rooted in military discipline, but its capacity for compassion is inconsistent. Staff relationships are described as generally respectful, even supportive. 93% of detainees said they trusted staff, but complaints processes were found to be stiff and terse, with formal grievances often brushed aside without proper investigation. This fuels a simmering resentment. Men with violent convictions or sexual offences are released back to the community without robust monitoring, creating a dangerous gap in public protection. There is no systematic assessment of their risk to others, no routine phone monitoring, and no coordination with social services about child contact restrictions. Some of these men simply walk out of MCTC and go home, their victims never warned, their communities unaware. Even day-to-day repairs inside the wings can be slow, and detainees grumble about the night lights destroying their sleep. The dormitories are militarily neat, with inspections every day, but there is no mistaking the sense of collective punishment that hovers over everything. The segregation cells of the service custody platoon are still used on rare occasions, 3 times in the last year, to break men who cannot or will not obey. These men are given worksheets to reflect on what they did wrong, in a forced ritual of psychological reprogramming, before they are deemed fit to rejoin the general population. There is a sense of desperation among those who do not know if they will ever wear a uniform again. Some still believe they can rebuild a military future. Others know they will leave these gates only to face the same humiliations and broken opportunities as any civilian ex-prisoner. There is no certainty, and many live in a constant state of anxiety, scanning their mail, praying for news about whether they will be retained or discharged. Despite some positives, good healthcare, reasonably fast dental services, a safe environment with virtually no drugs, no deaths by suicide, and very little violence, MCTC still clings to its outdated rules, shaped by an armed forces culture decades old. Detainees must still get Secretary of State permission to have their letters or calls monitored, leaving a giant hole in public protection. Rules about child contact remain out of sync with civilian standards. Complaints processes are still rooted in rigid chain of command structures rather than independent scrutiny. In the end, MCTC remains a place that looks polished on paper, but feels to many detainees like a stripped-down, uniformed purgatory. It is cleaner and more ordered than a civilian jail, but carries its own brand of psychological torment, with men forced to confront the collapse of their status as proud soldiers. In a world that thrives on discipline, there is still little room for true empathy. The question remains whether the British military truly wants to rehabilitate these men, or simply break them down before spitting them back out into society. Is the MCTC truly a place of second chances, or just another uniformed prison? Should society tolerate a system that returns violent or sexual offenders to the public with no real supervision? And what happens to the young soldiers, barely men, whose only crime was going absent without leave, but who now carry the weight of shame, institutionalization, and fear that they may never belong anywhere again? Michael Lyons was sentenced to 7 months imprisonment in 2011 after developing a conscientious objection to the war in Afghanistan, but being refused discharge from the Royal Navy. Mr. Lyons had backed calls from the Peace Pledge Union for a change in the law to ensure that all forces personnel have a right to leave when they choose, especially if they develop a conscientious objection to war. He was speaking ahead of International Conscientious Objectors Day. The Peace Pledge Union, PPU, Britain's leading pacifist organisation, called for the law to be changed as part of the new Armed Forces Bill promised in the Queen's speech earlier this week. In theory, members of the UK's armed forces have the right to apply for discharge if they develop a conscientious objection, but this is very rarely granted. According to the ATTI's helpline for members of the armed forces, most forces personnel are unaware that this right exists in law. Michael Lyons was turned down when he applied for discharge on grounds of conscientious objection. In 2011, he was convicted of refusing to obey an order after declining to take part in rifle training and sentenced to 7 months in the Military Corrective Training Centre, a euphemism for a military prison in Colchester. A spell in Collie will no doubt have a significant impact on both service and family life. Personnel from all 3 services could face time at the Military Corrective Training Centre for offences that carry sentences of anything from 14 days to 2 years. Whether or not they are able to continue their career following their detention, it's bound to be a worrying time for everyone. We paid a visit to the MCTC in Colchester to find out more. When you go behind the wire, you could be forgiven for thinking it's just like any other camp. Yes, there are stricter protocols, but the surroundings appear familiar and there's a sense of positivity. The focus is on rehabilitation, preparing detainees to return to their unit or getting them ready for civilian life. There's a reason why the reoffending rate is less than 10%, far lower than in state prisons. There are 3 grounds on which personnel can end up here, as MCTC Welfare Officer Alison Tate explains. There's court-martial, from which you can be sent here and then potentially soldier on or be discharged. Or court-martial, where you can be sent to a civilian prison and you come here first to effectively leave the service. Or you can have a summary hearing from your commanding officer who looks at what you've done and makes a decision as to how many days you can be sent here for within their legal remit. Detainees are split into A company for those staying in and D company for those discharging from the services when their sentence is complete. They are normally housed in 2 separate wings with communal areas in between, but with low numbers at the time of writing, they're all in together. Alison says the biggest shock for families is when the soldier isn't expecting to do time. Perhaps they're up to see the CO and think they're just going to get a few extra duties, and then all of a sudden the CO says, "You've got 30 days in MCTC." Even if they're going to a court-martial, some will believe they'll only end up with a community order, and that's the impression they give their family. From the moment the court-martial sentence happens, they are brought here. There's no going home to your family first. Sometimes personnel, when they get here, we ask which family member they get on with the best so they have someone to contact, because it's miserable unless you've got someone to ring or have a Skype call with, adds Alison. It's the unit's responsibility to check that the family is being supported, but the system isn't perfect, and sometimes people fall through the net. I've called some welfare officers who haven't even been informed by their chain of command that one of their soldiers is doing 28 days at MCTC, says Alison. They might have thought that it's a single soldier with no issues, but we've had a scenario where someone was going home every weekend to fill the fridge, do the washing, and make 5 packed lunches for their 2 younger brothers because their parents were unable to, in effect, a weekend carer. These are things that welfare might not be aware of. Personnel have their pay stopped on arrival, and whether or not you have other income, it's a real blow to suddenly be without 1 salary, so me a third 5. A family maintenance grant covers the cost of service family accommodation while the soldier is in detention, and there is also an element which may support the non-serving spouse whilst waiting for a benefits decision, or if I'm able to access benefits, for example, if overseas. Families in their own home should receive support from the unit on how to manage finances. Charities such as SAFA and the Royal British Legion may also be able to help. Alison and her team make the detainees' family considerations a priority on arrival. She says, "On the second day we go through the whole hard facts: health, accommodation, relocation, drugs and alcohol, finances, attitudes, thinking and behaviour, children and families, training and support. Who are your dependents? Who's missing you? Where do they get money from? Who puts food on the table? Picture all these standing orders and direct debits on your bank statement and just imagine that your pay that month doesn't happen. It can be very worrying. So we sit with them and go through all those responsibilities, and then as a moment. The children's charity Barnados works closely with MCTC and meets every detainee who has parental responsibilities, including those who are estranged from their partner and have limited contact with their children. They offer support to families wherever they are based, with tailor-made resources for parents and schools to give children emotional support. Donmay.com. There's a comfortable play area for family visits with plenty of toys for little ones, and since introducing video calls during the pandemic, families can now visit virtually, which has proved invaluable during the current cost of living crisis, where travel to Colchester can be too expensive for some. Mental, emotional and physical well-being is a priority. The welfare staff ensure that detainees have access to counselling for drug and alcohol addiction, bereavement, emotional and anger management issues. The chaplaincy is also on hand, with faith leaders from all major religions. For Foreign and Commonwealth personnel, Alison links in with AFF's F&C team. AFF is always quick to respond and able to provide expert information and guidance on a subject that few others have the knowledge to advise on, she explains. Those returning to unit are taken through a 16-week military training program to give them all the military skills they need to go back to their roles. Corporal James Wright Military Training Wing says, "It's skills they go through in basic training, and we just refine them to a high standard. There's no rank structure here, so they all do the same training. They're natural leaders in many cases, so some do find it hard to adjust, but others are a great help." If discharge is on the horizon, the Education and Training Wing ensures that detainees are as well prepared as possible. There are classrooms, a library, and an IT suite where they can go every day to work towards qualifications. Senior Education Officer Sarah Brown showed us around. "We do an Employability Skills Level 2 qualification as a minimum. That's what we want them to leave with. We base the coursework on what industry they want to go into, tailor their CV and run mock interviews. There are also connections with local colleges and government-funded courses to get stuck into for those who are in for long enough. There are so many, we've had people do anything from web design to barbering," adds Sarah. For more vocational qualifications, there are workshops for welding, forklift truck operation or mechanics, plus basic construction courses, with city and guilds qualifications on offer. Some have managed to build entire bathrooms under the guidance of construction skills instructor Colin Pethick. Long-termers do projects. I give them the plans and they have to do everything, including electrics and plumbing. They come here in the morning, like a normal working day. At the back of the camp is a small holding with goats, pigs and chickens, as well as a vegetable garden and beehives. It offers a sanctuary to be around nature and kept busy with odd jobs that are always needed, and it's under constant development thanks to the passion and dedication of former soldier turned farm manager Pete Phillips. Detainees can come over here and do basic farming, bits of carpentry, animal welfare, and just general hands-on stuff, he says. There's lots of potential here and we're trying to improve it bit by bit. The establishment was given a good report last year by the HM Inspectorate of Prisons, which headlined its priorities on education and care. Corporal Wright summed up the approach. "I don't think it's because of one particular method that we employ. It's a case of the multiple things we do here that come together and help people make the right choices.